Before we dive into one of the most extraordinary stories from the Vietnam War, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now, smash that subscribe button, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Whether you're in Texas, Tokyo, or Timbuktu, I want to know. May 20th, 1942. Little Rock, Arkansas. While the world tore itself apart in World War II, a baby was born who would grow up to become one of the most feared warriors of the next generation's war. Carlos Norman Hathcock, too, came from nothing. His parents separated when he was young, and he spent his childhood living with his grandmother in rural Arkansas, where survival wasn't a skill, it was a requirement. Growing up in Wynne, Arkansas, young Carlos spent countless hours in the woods with his father's war trophy, a German Mauser rifle brought back from Europe. But this wasn't play. The Hathcock family was poor, desperately poor, and young Carlos hunted to put food on the table. Squirrels, rabbits, deer, if it moved, he learned to hit it. And hit it on the first shot, because ammunition cost money they didn't have. In these Arkansas woods, something extraordinary was being forged. While other boys his age were playing baseball or learning to drive, Carlos was teaching himself the ancient art of the hunt. He learned to move through the forest without making a sound. He learned to read the wind by watching how leaves turned in the breeze. He learned that patience wasn't just a virtue, it was the difference between eating and going hungry. Most importantly, he learned to think like his prey. Where would a deer feel safe? Where would it go when threatened? What patterns did it follow? This ability to enter the mind of his target, to predict behavior and movement, would become his greatest weapon years later in a jungle 8,000 miles away. But young Carlos didn't dream of hunting. He dreamed of something bigger. He dreamed of becoming a United States Marine. On May 20th, 1959, his 17th birthday, Carlos walked into a recruiting office and signed his name. His grandmother tried to talk him out of it. The Marines were the toughest, most demanding branch of the military. Why not the Army or Navy? But Carlos didn't want easy. He wanted to be the best. And the best became Marines. His natural talent with a rifle immediately set him apart. While other recruits struggled to hit targets at 100 yards, Hathcock was grouping shots at 300, 500, 800 yards with mechanical precision. His instructors had never seen anything like it. Here was a kid from the backwoods of Arkansas who could outshoot Marines with decades of experience. In 1965, Hathcock achieved something that seemed impossible. At Camp Perry in Ohio, competing against the best marksmen in the entire United States military, he won the Wimbledon Cup, the most prestigious long-range shooting competition in America. He was just 23 years old. Marine Corps Captain Edward James Land took notice. Land was revolutionizing how the Marines thought about snipers. In World War II and Korea, snipers had been an afterthought. Marksmen pulled from regular units when needed, given a scoped rifle, and told to take potshots at the enemy. Land understood that snipers could be so much more. They could be force multipliers, psychological weapons, precision instruments that could eliminate high-value targets, spread fear through enemy ranks, and shift the momentum of entire battles. But to do this, snipers needed to be selected, trained, and deployed with the same care as elite special forces. And Carlos Hathcock, the farm boy who hunted for dinner and won shooting championships for glory, was exactly the kind of man Land was looking for. In 1966, as America's involvement in Vietnam escalated from advisory to full-scale war, Hathcock deployed to Southeast Asia as a military policeman. He lasted exactly 3 days before Captain Land found him and said 6 words that would change military history. "Hathcock, I need you to shoot people." Vietnam wasn't like any war America had fought before. This wasn't the clear battle lines of World War II, where armies faced each other across fields and beaches. This wasn't even Korea, where the front advanced and retreated over recognizable terrain. Vietnam was something else entirely, a nightmare of jungle warfare where the enemy could be anywhere, anyone, invisible until the moment they struck. The statistics tell the story. By 1966, American forces were suffering casualties at an alarming rate, not from large-scale battles, but from ambushes, sniper fire, and booby traps. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army had home field advantage in terrain that seemed designed to swallow conventional military tactics whole. The jungle was so dense that visibility often dropped to 10 feet. The heat was oppressive, temperatures regularly exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit with humidity so thick you could practically drink the air. The terrain could be hilly, mountainous, or swampy, with almost always dense vegetation that needed to be accounted for to find the right angle for a shot. And unlike the open battlefields of previous wars, there were no clear lines. The enemy didn't wear easily identifiable uniforms. They didn't mass in formation. They struck from the shadows and melted away. American soldiers were being picked off one by one. A Marine patrol would move through the jungle, and suddenly the point man would drop, killed by a shot from an enemy sniper they never saw. Artillery and air support were nearly useless. You can't bomb what you can't see. Even when American forces knew generally where the enemy was, flushing them out required sending men into kill zones. The psychological toll was staggering. Imagine knowing that somewhere in the jungle, an enemy sniper is watching you through a scope. You don't know where. You don't know when he'll fire. Every step could be your last. Every rustle of leaves could be the wind, or it could be death. This constant stress wore down even the toughest soldiers, creating a pervasive atmosphere of fear and paranoia. And then there was the political reality. This wasn't World War II, where the entire nation was mobilized for total war. Back home in America, protests were growing. The public wanted results, wanted progress, wanted their sons to come home. But how do you measure progress when there are no towns to capture, no territory to hold? The only metric became body count. How many enemy soldiers were killed? And the Viet Cong were winning that war of attrition. The U.S. military needed a different approach. They needed weapons that could strike with precision, that could eliminate high-value targets without putting entire platoons at risk, that could turn the enemy's own tactics against them. They needed men who could move through the jungle as silently as the Viet Cong, who could wait for days if necessary, who could take one perfect shot and disappear. They needed snipers. But not just any snipers. They needed revolutionary thinkers who could adapt centuries-old principles to this new, impossibly difficult battlefield. When Carlos Hathcock arrived at Hill 55, the Marine firebase southwest of Da Nang, he inherited a situation that would have broken lesser men. Enemy forces controlled most of the territory surrounding the base. American patrols ventured out, suffered casualties, and returned without making meaningful progress. The Viet Cong had their own snipers, and they were good. Trained by Soviet advisors, equipped with quality rifles and scopes, these enemy marksmen knew the terrain intimately and used it to devastating effect. They would position themselves in tree lanes, in rice paddies, in abandoned villages, and wait for American targets to present themselves. Many Marine snipers died trying to fight them on equal terms. And there was one particular problem that everyone at Hill 55 knew about, but nobody could solve. Enemy snipers were operating with impunity around the base, picking off Marines during patrols and even, horrifyingly, shooting officers and sergeants inside the wire. The enemy had studied American tactics and knew that eliminating leaders created chaos that lasted far longer than killing regular soldiers. The North Vietnamese had sent a countersniper known as the Cobra, who killed a Marine gunnery sergeant outside Hathcock's own living quarters on base. Hathcock watched him die. He stood there as the man's blood soaked into the Vietnamese dirt and made a vow that would define his entire deployment. He was going to find the Cobra, no matter how long it took, no matter how dangerous it became. This was personal now. But Hathcock faced a fundamental problem. The same problem that had plagued snipers throughout history and had intensified tenfold in Vietnam's impossible terrain. How do you find an enemy who doesn't want to be found? How do you outsmart someone who's using all the same tricks, who has equal training, who understands the hunter's mindset as well as you do? The answer would come from the unlikeliest place, from Hathcock's childhood in Arkansas, from years of hunting animals that could smell you from hundreds of yards away, hear your heartbeat, vanish at the slightest wrong move. He would need to become something more than a soldier. He would need to become a ghost. Carlos Hathcock's revolutionary approach to sniping wasn't a high-tech gadget or a new weapon system. It was something far more fundamental, something that made perfect sense once you understood it, but required a specific mindset to execute. The simple trick. Patience combined with absolute stillness. But not just any stillness, the kind of motionless, calculated invisibility that turns a human being into a piece of terrain. While other snipers would take positions and wait for a few hours, maybe a day, Hathcock would prepare a hide site and remain there for 3, 4, sometimes 5 days without moving more than a few inches. Here's what made this approach revolutionary. Hathcock understood that the human brain is wired to detect movement. Your eye might pass over a camouflaged person 100 times, but the moment they shift position, scratch an itch, or adjust their weapon, that movement triggers an ancient predator detection system in the human visual cortex. The Viet Cong snipers were good, but they were still human. They would settle into position, scan the area, and if they didn't see anything after a reasonable time, they'd assume it was safe. That's when Hathcock had them. But this technique required suffering that most men couldn't endure. Imagine lying in the same position for 72 hours in 100-degree heat. Mosquitoes swarm your face, you can't swat them. Ants crawl across your skin, you can't brush them away. Your muscles scream from staying locked in place. You're desperately thirsty but can only sip water through a tube. You need to urinate but can't move to do so. Your nose itches, your back spasms, your legs cramp. Normal human instinct is screaming at you to move, to stretch, to do something. Hathcock would spend hours or even days in a single position, waiting for the perfect shot, with acute awareness of his surroundings allowing him to make precise calculations about wind speed, humidity, and environmental factors. But Hathcock had been training for this his entire life, even if he didn't know it. Those childhood hunting trips in Arkansas, sitting motionless in a tree stand waiting for a deer, had built an almost superhuman tolerance for discomfort. He could enter a kind of meditative state where his consciousness separated from his body's complaints. His mind remained alert, scanning, analyzing, while his body became part of the landscape. The second part of his innovation involved preparation that bordered on obsessive. Before Hathcock ever took a shot, he would study his target area for days. He'd sketch maps, noting where paths crossed, where tree shadows fell at different times of day, where puddles collected after rain. He understood that human beings are creatures of habit. An enemy soldier walking the same patrol route would probably step in the same places, pause at the same spots, follow the same patterns day after day. Then came the hide site construction, and this is where Hathcock's technique separated him from conventional snipers. He wouldn't just find a good position, he would build an elaborate camouflaged nest that could sustain him for extended operations. He'd dig out a shallow depression, create a stable platform for his rifle, and most ingeniously, he would pack dense mounds of snow, or in Vietnam, mud and vegetation, in front of his position. This served 3 critical purposes. First, it concealed the muzzle flash when he fired. Second, it absorbed the characteristic puff of disturbed material that gives away a sniper's position. Third, and most cleverly, it gave him a stable rest for his rifle, allowing for more accurate shots at extreme ranges. Every detail mattered. Hathcock would camouflage his rifle scope by wrapping it in cloth, because sunlight reflecting off glass had given away the position of more snipers than anything else. He preferred iron sights for this reason. No reflection, no glint, nothing to betray his location. Hathcock dealt with similar challenges by keeping sugar and bread in his pockets for calories, and would pack snow in his mouth to hide his breath. Hathcock adapted similar techniques, understanding that in the jungle heat, even your breath could create visible distortion in the air. But perhaps his most psychologically devastating innovation was his choice of target. While other snipers focused on achieving high kill counts, Hathcock was more selective. He targeted officers, radio men, and anyone who appeared to be giving orders. The mathematics were brutal but effective. Killing 10 regular soldiers created 10 holes in the enemy formation. Killing one officer could paralyze an entire company. The Viet Cong quickly learned to fear this. They stopped wearing rank insignia in the field. Officers carried regular rifles instead of pistols. Radio men disguised their equipment. But Hathcock could still spot them. It was in how other soldiers deferred to them, how they moved with confidence, how they studied maps or consulted with others. His hunter's instinct, honed on Arkansas deer, could read body language and social dynamics from hundreds of yards away. Then there was his signature white feather. Most snipers operated on the principle of never standing out, never being memorable. Hathcock did the opposite. He tucked a white feather into his bush hat and wore it openly. This wasn't bravado for its own sake, it was psychological warfare of the highest order. The Viet Cong and PVN called Hathcock White Feather, and after a platoon of Vietnamese snipers was sent to hunt him down, many Marines in the same area donned white feathers to deceive the enemy. Think about the psychological impact. The enemy knew the white feather was out there. They knew he was hunting them. They knew he had killed dozens of their comrades. But they couldn't find him. They couldn't stop him. And now, suddenly, they were seeing white feathers everywhere. Was that the real white feather, or a decoy? This created a paranoia that spread through enemy ranks like a virus. Soldiers became hesitant to move. Patrols would spot a white feather and refuse to advance. Entire operations were disrupted because the enemy feared that one American sniper might be somewhere in the jungle. One man was tying down dozens, sometimes hundreds of enemy soldiers through pure psychological dominance. The PAVN placed a $30,000 bounty on Hathcock's head, compared to typical bounties of $8 to $2,000 for other U.S. snipers. This massive bounty actually worked in Hathcock's favor. Enemy snipers became obsessed with collecting it, which made them predictable. They would take risks, break concealment, make mistakes, and Hathcock was always watching, always waiting. His rifle of choice was deliberately simple, a Winchester Model 70 with a standard 8-power unertl scope. While other snipers wanted the latest technology, Hathcock trusted basics executed to perfection. He knew his rifle's exact capabilities and limitations. He'd fired so many thousands of rounds through it that he could compensate for its quirks instinctively. The rifle was an extension of his body, as natural as pointing a finger. And then there was his philosophy on shooting, which sounds simple but requires incredible discipline: one shot, one kill. This wasn't just a slogan. It was operational doctrine. Every shot fired gave away your position. Every shot was an opportunity for the enemy to triangulate your location. So every shot had to count. Hathcock would pass up dozens of good enough shots waiting for the one perfect opportunity when everything, wind, distance, target exposure, escape route, aligned. This patient approach paid devastating dividends during his legendary 5-day engagement where he and his spotter held off an entire company of Viet Cong. Rather than engaging targets indiscriminately, they would take carefully aimed shots at leaders and radio men, call in artillery on the disorganized survivors, then melt away to a new position. The enemy never knew where the shots were coming from. Panic set in. A unit that should have overrun the 2 Marines instead fell apart. The results of Hathcock's approach were almost too dramatic to believe. During his first tour in Vietnam from 1966 to 1967, he achieved 86 confirmed kills. But the real number, the one that kept Viet Cong soldiers awake at night, was estimated between 300 and 400. The difference came from Vietnam's strict confirmation requirements. Every kill needed verification from both the spotter and a third-party officer. When you're operating behind enemy lines or in no man's land, that third-party verification was often impossible. Hathcock came out of his first tour with 86 confirmed kills and a whole gob of probables, with his next tour being just as eventful. But numbers alone don't tell the story. What mattered was the strategic and psychological impact that rippled far beyond individual kills. Within months of his arrival at Hill 55, American casualties from enemy sniper fire in that sector dropped by over 60%. Marine patrols that had previously been decimated by ambushes now moved with greater confidence, knowing that somewhere out in the jungle, the white feather was watching over them. Officers who had been prime targets could finally do their jobs without constantly looking over their shoulders. The enemy's reaction told the real story. North Vietnamese commanders became obsessed with eliminating Hathcock. They pulled experienced snipers from other sectors and sent them specifically to hunt the white feather. They offered that unprecedented $30,000 bounty, the equivalent of several years' salary for a Vietnamese soldier. They ordered artillery barrages on suspected positions. They even sent entire platoons into the jungle with the sole mission of finding one American Marine. Every single one of these efforts failed. Worse, many of the enemy snipers sent to kill Hathcock ended up dead themselves. The most famous was the encounter with the Cobra, an elite North Vietnamese sniper with multiple American kills to his name. The Cobra had studied Hathcock's tactics and was reportedly Soviet-trained. He was hunting the white feather just as intensely as the white feather was hunting him. When Hathcock saw a glint reflecting off the enemy sniper's scope in the bushes, he fired at it, shooting through the scope and killing the sniper. The physics of this shot are almost impossible. For Hathcock's bullet to travel through the Cobra's scope, it means the enemy sniper had to be aimed directly at Hathcock at the exact moment he fired. Both snipers saw each other simultaneously. But Hathcock pulled his trigger a fraction of a second faster. The bullet entered the Cobra's scope, traveled through the entire length of the scope tube, and struck him in the eye, killing him instantly. This shot became legendary, not just for its difficulty, but for what it represented. In the deadly game of sniper versus sniper, success is measured in milliseconds. Hathcock had won not through luck, but through faster pattern recognition, faster target acquisition, and faster execution. The student of Arkansas deer hunting had beaten a Soviet-trained professional through pure hunter's instinct. But perhaps Hathcock's most strategically significant mission came when he was tasked with assassinating a North Vietnamese army general. The operation required him to crawl 1,500 yards across open terrain, nearly a mile, to reach a shooting position. But this wasn't a quick sprint. To avoid detection by enemy patrols, guard posts, and sentries, Hathcock moved at a pace of roughly 10 yards per hour. Hathcock crawled over 1,500 yards in 4 days and 3 nights, without sleep, to assassinate an NVA general, at times only a few feet away from patrolling enemy soldiers. Think about that. 4 days and 3 nights. No sleep, because sleeping meant movement, and movement meant death. He lay on his side to reduce his profile. He moved only during moments of maximum distraction, when planes flew overhead, when artillery boomed in the distance, when the wind rustled vegetation. Sometimes he didn't move at all for 8, 10, 12 hours. He was bitten by insects. He nearly encountered a bamboo viper, one of the deadliest snakes in Southeast Asia. Enemy patrols passed within feet of his position. The physical and psychological strain would have broken most men. Your mind starts playing tricks after that long without sleep. You see things that aren't there. You question whether you're even moving in the right direction. Every moment is a test of will. But Hathcock's childhood had prepared him for this. Those long hours in deer stands, waiting in the cold Arkansas winter, learning to ignore discomfort and focus entirely on the hunt, that was his training. When he finally reached his position, set up his rifle, and waited for the general to emerge from his headquarters, the shot itself was almost anticlimactic. One pull of the trigger. One death. Then another 3-day crawl back to friendly lines. The assassination created chaos in enemy operations for weeks. Without their commander, the NVA unit operating in that sector became disorganized, missed opportunities, and eventually had to be pulled back to refit. One bullet, fired after 4 days of crawling, had achieved what weeks of conventional combat operations couldn't. Hathcock's longest confirmed kill during Vietnam demonstrated another aspect of his innovation. Using a Browning M2.50 caliber heavy machine gun mounted with a scope, he hit a target at 2,500 yards, 1.42 miles. Hathcock's record stood until Canadian sniper Aaron Perry of Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry exceeded it with a shot of 2,310 meters in 2002, meaning his record lasted 35 years. But the true measure of Hathcock's impact came from the Marines he saved. According to estimates from fellow soldiers, his operations prevented dozens, possibly hundreds of American casualties. Officers who would have been killed by enemy snipers lived to lead their men. Patrols that would have walked into ambushes were warned by Hathcock's reconnaissance. High-value enemy targets that would have coordinated major attacks were eliminated before they could act. The psychological impact on the enemy cannot be overstated. Captured Viet Cong and NVA soldiers spoke of their terror of the white feather. Some units reportedly refused to operate in areas where Hathcock was believed to be active. The mere possibility of his presence was enough to change enemy behavior, force them to take longer routes, delay operations, abandon plans. And perhaps most significantly, Hathcock proved that snipers could be more than just specialized marksmen. They could be strategic assets, force multipliers that achieved effects far beyond their individual actions. Military planners began to understand that one well-trained, well-positioned sniper could sometimes accomplish more than an entire platoon of conventional infantry. Hathcock's innovations in technique, tactics, and psychological warfare became the foundation for how the United States Marine Corps, and eventually the entire U.S. military, would train and deploy snipers from that point forward. His methods were codified, taught, and refined. And they worked, again and again, in conflicts from Desert Storm to Afghanistan to the present day. When Carlos Hathcock returned from his first tour in Vietnam in 1967, he was already a legend within the Marine Corps. But his story was far from over. Unable to stay away from the war, he returned to Vietnam in 1969, this time as a platoon commander training and leading other snipers. He was spreading his knowledge, creating a new generation of warriors who understood that patience and precision could trump firepower and numbers. Then, on September 16, 1969, Hathcock's career as a sniper came to a catastrophic end. He was riding in an LVTP-5 amphibious tractor along Highway 1 when it struck a 500-pound anti-tank mine. The vehicle exploded in a massive fireball, instantly engulfing everyone inside in burning gasoline. Hathcock was riding on an LVTP-5 that struck an anti-tank mine, and he pulled 7 Marines from the flame-engulfed vehicle, suffering severe burns to his face, arms, and legs. Think about this. He had just been in an explosion. He was on fire. Third-degree burns covered his body. The pain must have been unimaginable. Most people in that situation would be incapacitated, screaming, unable to function. But Hathcock didn't think about himself. He thought about his Marines. While flames consumed him, he pulled men from the wreckage. One by one, he dragged them to safety. 7 men. 7 lives saved while his own body was being destroyed. He didn't stop until someone physically pulled him away and plunged him into water, because he was so focused on rescuing others that he wasn't even aware of how badly he was burning. He received the Purple Heart almost immediately. But it would take nearly 30 years, until 1996, for him to receive the Silver Star he deserved for this act of heroism. The delay was typical of Hathcock's character. He refused to accept a recommendation for the Medal of Honor because he didn't think he'd done anything special. To him, saving fellow Marines wasn't heroism, it was just what you did. The burns ended his combat career, but not his contribution to the Corps. After extensive recovery, Hathcock was assigned to help establish and develop the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School at Quantico, Virginia. This was where his legacy truly multiplied. Everything he had learned, the patience, the stillness, the psychology, the preparation, all of it was systematized and turned into formal training doctrine. The sniper training program that Hathcock helped create became the gold standard for military marksmanship worldwide. His techniques were studied by military forces from allied nations. The concepts he pioneered about long-duration hides, psychological warfare, and target selection were incorporated into training manuals. His philosophy, one shot, one kill, became more than a motto. It became the foundational principle of modern sniper doctrine. But Hathcock's final years tested him in ways that even Vietnam never had. In 1975, he began experiencing strange symptoms: weakness, numbness, difficulty walking. The diagnosis was devastating. Multiple sclerosis, a progressive neurological disease that slowly destroys the nervous system. The man who had once held perfectly still for days, whose hands had been steady enough to thread bullets through enemy rifle scopes, gradually lost control of his own body. He was medically discharged in 1979 at the age of 37. For someone who had defined himself through the Marines, through service and purpose, this forced retirement was crushing. He fell into depression. The warrior who had faced death without flinching couldn't find his place in civilian life. But with his wife's support, he eventually found new purpose, turning to shark fishing as a hobby and continuing to provide sniper instruction to police SWAT teams and elite military units like SEAL Team 6. When asked in 1998 how he became such a good sniper, Hathcock replied simply, "Practice." Hathcock's answer to similar questions was equally humble. He never boasted about his achievements. He rarely spoke of his kills. When pressed, he would talk instead about the Marines he served with, the lives that were saved, the missions that succeeded. Carlos Hathcock died on February 22, 1999, at the age of 56. Multiple sclerosis had confined him to a wheelchair, but his legacy was standing tall. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper School that he helped found continues to produce some of the finest marksmen in the world. The Carlos Hathcock Award is given annually to the Marine Corps' top shooter. The Springfield Armory even created a rifle variant named in his honor, the M25 White Feather. But the real legacy isn't the awards or the records. It's the fundamental shift in how modern militaries think about snipers. Before Hathcock, snipers were often seen as lone wolves, assassins who operated outside normal military doctrine. After Hathcock, they were understood as integrated, strategic assets who could shape battlefields and save lives. The lessons from his career extend far beyond military applications. His story teaches us about the power of patience in a world that demands instant results, about the value of preparation over improvisation, about how sometimes the simple approach, executed with discipline and perfection, beats the complex solution every time. Hathcock's simple trick wasn't a gimmick or a shortcut. It was the hard path, the path that required more discipline and suffering than most people can imagine. Lying motionless for days while insects crawled across your face. Ignoring pain, thirst, exhaustion, and every instinct that screams at you to move. Waiting for the one perfect shot instead of taking the dozen good-enough shots that would compromise your position. In our modern world of instant gratification and constant stimulation, Hathcock's story feels almost alien. We live in a culture that can't sit still for 5 minutes without checking a phone. That sees patience as a weakness rather than a strength. That wants results now, not in 4 days after crawling through the mud. But the problems that matter, the challenges that actually change things, they don't yield to impatience. They require the kind of sustained focus and disciplined preparation that Hathcock exemplified. Whether you're building a business, mastering a craft, or fighting a war, the principle remains the same. Perfect preparation plus perfect patience produces perfect execution. Consider what Hathcock could have accomplished with modern technology. Thermal imaging, night vision, laser rangefinders, communications systems. But here's the thing, he didn't need any of that. With nothing but iron sights, a good rifle, and superhuman patience, he achieved results that modern snipers with millions of dollars in equipment still struggle to match. That's the power of fundamentals. That's what happens when raw skill meets unbreakable discipline. Modern snipers still study Hathcock's missions. They still analyze his decisions, his positioning, his tactical choices. Military historians still debate the exact details of some of his most legendary shots. And in sniper training schools around the world, instructors still tell recruits about the white feather, not to intimidate them, but to show them what's possible when you commit fully to the craft. There's a deeper lesson here about human potential. Hathcock wasn't born with superhuman abilities. He wasn't genetically engineered or cybernetically enhanced. He was a poor kid from Arkansas who hunted to eat and decided to be the best at what he did. Everything he accomplished came from dedication, practice, and an unshakable commitment to excellence. In his own words, Hathcock said, "I like shooting and I love hunting. But I never did enjoy killing anybody. It's my job. If I don't get those bastards, then they're gonna kill a lot of these kids dressed up like Marines." That's the way I look at it. That perspective, that he was protecting his fellow Marines, not glorifying violence, defined everything he did. His story reminds us that in any field, mastery comes from understanding fundamentals so deeply that they become instinct. It comes from preparation that goes beyond what seems reasonable. It comes from the willingness to do what others won't, to endure discomfort, to practice when it's boring, to focus when everything around you is chaos. The farm boy who hunted for dinner became the most feared sniper in Vietnam. The Marine who wore a white feather to dare his enemies to find him became an untouchable ghost. The man who could have achieved legendary status by boasting about his kills chose instead to train the next generation. And the warrior who saved 7 men from a burning vehicle while his own body was on fire showed us what true heroism looks like. Carlos Hathcock's legacy lives on every time a Marine sniper takes position. Every time patience defeats haste. Every time preparation trumps technology. Every time one person, through skill and discipline, changes the course of events far beyond what anyone thought possible. His simple trick, patience, stillness, preparation, and the courage to execute when the moment came, wasn't just about warfare. It's a philosophy for excellence in any endeavor. Whether you're hunting deer in Arkansas or enemy soldiers in Vietnam or success in any field, the principle remains: do the work no one else will do. Be patient when everyone else is rushing. Perfect your craft until it becomes second nature. And when the moment comes, execute without hesitation. That's what Carlos Hathcock taught us. Not just how to be a better sniper, but how to be better at anything that matters. Before you go, I need you to do something. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Subscribe to this channel because we're bringing you more stories like this. Stories of courage, innovation, and human excellence that the world needs to remember. And drop a comment telling me, what's your takeaway from Carlos Hathcock's story? What challenges in your own life require more patience, more preparation, more discipline? Because that's the real lesson here. Hathcock's techniques were revolutionary in warfare, but the principles behind them, patience, preparation, discipline, execution, those are universal. Whether you're building something, creating something, or fighting for something, those principles will serve you just as they served that young Marine with a white feather in his hat. The white feather is gone, but his legacy remains. And if we're paying attention, if we're willing to learn, that legacy can change us too. One shot, one kill, one life lived with purpose and excellence. That's the story of Carlos Hathcock. Don't let it be forgotten.